Welcome back, everybody, to the CAHSAH Hospice Emergency Regulations podcast series, a special edition of At the Table with CAHSAH. We're breaking down California's new hospice regulations one section at a time. Actually, we're doing it, each week, where we focus on a very specific area of the emergency regulations. And then what makes it even better is that the following Wednesday, CAHSAH is hosting a live webinar on that same subject where our experts will get to drill down a lot deeper than what we get to do on this podcast. And you'll be able to explore the regulatory requirements, practical implementation issues, and some of the questions hospice leaders are facing in real time. And most importantly, I think this is the best part of it, it would be for me, is you get an opportunity to ask questions during a live Q&A. So if you listen to the podcast, you get kind of a sense of what the webinar is going to be about, maybe formulate a couple of questions beforehand, before going in, and you'll be looking good. You'll be glad you did. So I think partaking in both of them is a good idea, if you don't mind me saying. Anyway, today we're talking about policies and procedures. Yes, policies and procedures. Perhaps not the sexiest topic in the world, but they must be done. Now, let me set the table here before I introduce our experts. I've been around hospice long enough to know that every hospice has policies. I've seen the binders, the manuals, the electronic folders, the hundreds, perhaps thousands of pages outlining how organizations are supposed to operate. Here's what I've learned from our experts already, just a few podcasts in on these emergency requirements. Having a policy, and correct me if I'm wrong, experts, having a policy is not the same as following a policy. And perhaps the more important question is this: do your policies accurately reflect what actually happens inside your organization? So let me introduce our experts now. Joining me again at the table are Sharon Fredericks and Eric Peterson. Both of them are they're really two of California's most respected hospice experts. If you'd like to go into your bios, that would be fine. But I think a lot of the people already know who you are. So welcome again to At the Table, the special series.
Thank you, Mark. Those are kind words.
Okay, so Sharon, you're always good at this, the big picture stuff. Can we start with you? I mean, every healthcare organization already has policies and procedures. Why are they such an important part of California's hospice emergency regulations?
Well, pretty much right now, you're going to be replacing a lot of pages, or, as you very well stated, Mark, does your procedure match the policy? But we have enough new policies that your statement in the policy and procedure is going to be changing. I looked at I followed a lot of the fraudulent raids, etc. Unfortunately, as a consultant, been kind of close to a couple of them. And I realized that I think our regulations will set standards across the nation for great quality care, operational guidance. It seems a lot for us right now, right, Eric? It's like, oh my gosh, we have to think of this. So one of the things that we're trying to do in this series is maybe that you can establish some priorities. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today a little bit. Or maybe feel comfortable that could wait because you're really doing a good job, and just with some data or audits, you could show a surveyor that we really do understand the policy and our procedures are following the policy quite closely. That's kind of a topic that makes policies and procedures a little bit more exciting because we're probably doing some of them correct.
Yeah, right. Eric, you have anything to add to that?
Surveyors are going to tell you they're not, so you might as well try to be correct. You can either go for an A or you can go for an F. In the old school days, Or C, Ryan.
In the end, the policies are what guide your day-to-day operations, right? In a perfect world. I mean, that's the intent and the hope and the purpose behind all of them. I mean, each organization, I really feel, needs to strive to live up to their policies, certainly understand what's written on paper and make sure that they have, to your point, Mark, operational feasibility. You don't want to write something that you can't do. It's almost that will work to your detriment, right? But knowing ultimately what the new rules of engagement are here with the California Title 22 emergency regulations, our goal is to help kind of walk you through what areas need to be reviewed and touched up, and what areas ultimately likely need a brand new policy and procedure to be
Hmm.
developed in its
Hmm.
entirety. There are a couple, new items such as the geographic service area and unmet needs. There's information governance. There's the patient acuity system. A lot of different items that I think, to me, I kind of have my priority list, and I'm working through that, on a day to day manner right now with my organization. So we hope to make it easy. We hope to make it streamlined. Really give you the Cliff Note versions of what you can take back to your team and look to build in, to your policies, and ultimately make sure that you're meeting, those best patient practice requirements.
Yeah, I'm wondering, question for both of you actually. How many organizations make that assumption that just updating the policy manual means that the work is finished? That's all we need to do is just update the, check that box. It's all done now. Thank you very much. Can you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah. Do you want to take the lead, Sharon, or
No,
I
go for it,
can
Eric. You're
comment?
the one doing the
Yeah.
audits.
You know, Well, that's the rules are kinda easy. I mean, truthfully, in the end, I it's kinda funny when you look at the policies. I mean, they're almost a cut and paste of what the regulations are, and so there's nothing wrong with that, but it's making sense of it, understanding it, and then educating your team and your
Hmm.
staff and building the structure, right, to execute those policies. That's the framework, that's operations. I have a wonderful leader who that's her job is to make sure that's in place. My job as the compliance officer, right, is to have a program that probes and makes sure that those procedures are in fact executed as outlined, right, with the daily
Hmm.
operations,
Exactly.
and then investigated when there are deviations. And I joke that, I'm kind of the find it guy, but I'm not the fix it guy, and so a little bit of that in every organization. And the more that you understand the procedures that lead to any outcome, whether it's your paperwork or how you process your intake and referral or your night on call, like you need to have somebody who is ultimately there to be able to track and trend, deviations, or to provide real time data back to you to say, hey, here's where we're maybe, slipping, and
Yeah.
how do we, the company, get back on track.
Something
And
something you just said struck me. So I have this question. Some providers might wonder who owns the policy. I mean, compliance might draft them. Clinical leadership might review them. Should there be a clearly designated owner for every major policy, or how do you see
mm,
that working? How do you
I love that
recommend?
question. Honestly, I'm trying to find the right answer
Let's see if
myself,
we're going to
Mark.
answer the same, Eric. You start and I'll raise my hand, yes or no.
I'm sorry. I
That's
took
okay. Go for it.
the words right out of your mouth, Sharon. For many years, the policies, I think, and I've worked with startups and smaller organizations, and I'm now with a rather large and robust provider that serves the biggest county in California, in Monterey, by geography. And so we've actually started a policy committee to where at this point we're all looking at the policies as a group of clinical leaders. We are reviewing them, updating them, ensuring that they have feasibility attached and QAPI or compliance attached. And it's really an educational session, I think, for my entire leadership
It
team.
is.
It helps to standardize ultimately the execution and the consistency with which you implement your policies, which is the most important piece. Just having them on paper and kind of tucked in a
Doesn't work.
in a binder somewhere is not gonna help you in the end, especially when they ask you what it is and you're like fumbling over your words. Confidence goes a long way in front of surveyors. And so I believe strongly that as we evolve, Mark, to answer your question, I think that each subset of policies by folder or by specific policy itself really should have a leader, but that leader brings that policy back to the committee to discuss what they want to change based on the rules changing or based on operational feasibility. And then you have this dialogue about, yes, let's adopt it and now let's implement it. And so there's many layers to that onion. And the more that you can involve everyone, I think the stronger you'll make your
Exactly.
organization.
But
Sharon,
ultimately, the administrator is responsible and then the governing body. Because when the
Correct. That's
feds
you
come in, the
signing off
governing
on.
body gets just as much blame as the administrator.
Yep.
So
Okay. Oh, let me ask you this too. Going back to the idea that, and I don't know if we were actually talking about this on the podcast or whether we were talking about it before, but I'll bring it up anyway. That the whole idea of policies and procedures, it can get a little bit dry. Policies and procedures are written in what I would consider to be sometimes regulatory and a lot of legal language, and it might be technical for staff to really even comprehend. So how do you deal with that? How do you make those policies more effective for folks?
So I think this is, again, where California is really setting a wonderful standard. The accrediting organizations have tried, and Eric mentioned education and competency. However, and Cindy Hatton's going to give us a lot of information on this on one of the series, but there is education now required by leadership. Hours and hours of education. You get some time to blend it in, but you just can't walk in anymore and say, I know how to do this without
Mhm.
anywhere from 20 to 24 plus annual hours of education that have to be certified, which CAHSAH has all of that done. So you can get all your certification through us. Um, and I think that's a really good thing. One of that, for instance, like you're saying, they're dry. But I've been in this business a long time, and yet when you have to define some of what they want described as the different organizations, the DOJ versus the OIG and all that other stuff, it makes perfect sense to the fraud and abuse teams out there. If you don't
Mhm.
know some of this stuff as the administrator, it will be cut and dried. But like as Eric said, you have to be at least confident enough or someone in the organization to say, that's the person with the most knowledge during a survey. Let me focus on my most knowledge, but mine is general as the administrator sometimes, and I have these people that are going to back me up. So everybody works as a team.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, truthfully, it's that disconnect between, like, I know what to do for my day-to-day job versus I know what the policy is. There can be a bit of a disconnect there, if not a really big disconnect. And so, sometimes you have to match it a little bit more, right, to what you're doing and make it in more layman's terms. But other times you just have to be able to speak to, here's what they're looking for, the concept, right, which is the policy, but this is exactly how we're implementing it from a day-to-day standpoint for both, execution and for monitoring. And, ultimately being confident in how you convey that and provide that answer, in the moment for a surveyor is critical. And then they're going to obviously want to reference back to your written, policies and procedures, and make sure that they're lining up and that you're in fact following it, because you can be cited for not following your own policy, even if it's not a
Right,
regulatory requirement.
right.
So you've got to make sure you're not painting yourself into a corner, right? By really trying to outline, ultimately, I'd say a best practice to beyond what is required. And so that's why it takes a team. And that's why
It
you,
does.
as the regulator, has to say, here's the rules, in spite of what maybe, an operational person hopes it can be or do. And so you have to educate everyone in your organization. I think Sharon made a great statement. You're now required to basically put these policies and procedures in front of a brand new administrator to your organization or to California as a whole, and they have to be spoon-fed the information, and
Hmm.
it has to
Hmm.
be exactly what you're doing that also meets exactly what the state is requiring of you.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. I mean, what I'm hearing you say is that, just because there's a policy change doesn't mean that everybody knows it or everybody understands it, and we can't just email it to people and assume that, okay, everything's hunky dory. Um, so how does leadership determine whether the staff is actually that they actually understand the policy? Are they going to need to use competency checks and direct observation, or how do you recommend they go about that?
All of that, audits, things like that, especially for staff that are newer in home care and hospice of any setting. Um, they they need a lot of guidance
What about
and
per diem, what about per diem folks?
Mm.
I mean, lots of people are using per diem employees, so
Yeah, I mean, to the regulators, they don't care what your hiring status is. Everyone has to be trained to the same level of detail. And so, where you really have to, I think, have discussions with your operational leadership is ultimately in that investment in that individual at the time of new hire. There's a lot of folks who just say, hey, they're a home health nurse, they're a hospice nurse, they know what they're doing, they've been doing it for 10 years. Let's get them out there. And well, they might know what a notice of Medicare non-coverage is, or, the advanced beneficiary notice, or the hospice non-covered items, services, and drugs. But the way that your organization educates on it, delivers that information to the
Yeah.
patient, ultimately the time frame that you have to get it done, is it a start of care function? Is it an RN case management function? Like all of those things are not going to be tied into your policy in that level of detail. So, taking the time to educate your staff as you're making these changes is critical. But most importantly, the time a new hire is where you have a chance to kind of take a blank canvas, God willing, right? Or at least one that might have a beautiful picture already there that you can kind of touch up with the specifics of how you implement your day-to-day operations. And
I
it
think
goes
that helps
beyond
with retention too. Then they know what you expect. They're not out there just like floating around going, "Oh,
yeah,
I guess I should do it this way." They know how to work for your agency.
absolutely. And that's the art of education. I help to oversee the education and onboarding process for our company. And we've, been state waiver accepted for a 16-week program. And, the more that you can invest and
Mhm.
develop, the
Exactly.
better product and the better outcome. We oftentimes will have them sign off on a policy and a procedure at the time of new hire, and then I'll sit down and I'll go over it with them verbally, so that way they really understand the day-to-day and the take-home message. I'm like, "Hey, you read that thing on mandated reporting, right? So
Yeah,
what's it
right.
mean to
But do
you?"
you understand it?
And you're supposed to call your
Yeah.
administrator within 24 hours to report it. Do you know why that is, though? It's
And you
because
better
of
let the state know within 36 or whatever it
eh,
is. Yeah. It's
bingo.
different with kids and adults.
Yes, yes, the time
But
frames are
I
all
I
in.
think just supporting staff out there, I always try to make like you were saying earlier, both of you, teams are important. If you look at your procedure and you do a flow chart and everybody is sitting in the room laughing that this is never going to work, you better be redoing your procedure then because it isn't going to work. I mean, we need to think like NASA. It's like put it all over the wall, make stickies, pictures, whatever, and have those meetings. And even though they seem like this is can be a waste of time, it's team building in all effort, and it's amazing what people come back with.
Yeah.
And they will solve their own day to day problems if we let them. But it's like giving them the respect and the policy in front of them so they can interpret it for their patient population and what they do with their job. And it becomes fun at that point. So it's not just a dry old policy. Again, it's like I helped create this.
Yeah, that creation piece, I think I can't, highlight that enough. It ultimately it leads to their retention of the knowledge, right? I mean, they wrote it, so it came out of them, it's
Exactly.
what we're gonna do. It's how it should be written. And so that's a critically important missing element. Oftentimes you're like, here's the policy and here's what it is.
Yeah.
Now go implement it. It's not gonna sink in, ultimately. And so that's where, again, I think a committee, right, is important, or a leader is important,
Mhm.
and involving for the requirements, your administrator has to be there and approve it all at the end, and as well as the governing body. And there are new policies that are specific to the governing body's
Yes,
oversight
there
and
are.
documented requirements. So just to kind of give you one, it's the information governance policy and ultimately like appeals and record request process. Your governing body has to, put pen to paper and say, this is a policy that I approve. And so there's some governing bodies out there that are going to be a little hesitant to that, because they're like, hey, I got to do all that. Well, you got to orient your governing body too, technically. So
Exactly.
I hope
Right.
there's plans in place for that.
Well,
So,
I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of change in medical records, documentation submission, things like that. To me, that's one whole like couple people's specialty then in the office.
Hmm.
HR, have you seen that one where once the employee signs the confidentiality statement, it must be signed by the administrator? It just doesn't go in your personnel file anymore. I mean,
Yep.
there's a lot of fraud and abuse underlying stuff in there that's going to make us better. It's just
Yep.
a lot of work right now.
So let me ask you to just to sort of lay out some of the deliverables on the in the webinar on the webinar for
Hmm.
the webinar on Wednesday. Can you kind of briefly go over that? What am I going to come away with?
You're going to maybe some of the most risky ones if you do not have a compliance plan in place right away. Hopefully, if we go through the top, I say 10 to 15 policies, probably closer to 12. A lot of those blend right into your compliance plan. And they would help you get survey ready. And in case nobody can get there Wednesday and you're still upset about this, which a lot of people are, don't think they have to be picture perfect. If you're revising a policy, like Eric's saying in a group, get some stickies in there, get some red ink or whatever. The important thing to me is that you're working on them. So hopefully we can help you prioritize a little bit within your own agency as we throw out the policy. Some of you are going to say, hey, my clinical problem, they're okay. I don't need to worry. But again, then have you oriented and competency tested your staff or have a calendar ready for all that? So if you're actively involved in flipping those pages electronically or by paper in that policy and procedure manual, the surveyors will understand you're hopefully trying to do your best. We can't do everything
Absolutely.
overnight, but we can certainly put best practice ahead that we're really working on this and concerned.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think to bring, to the attention of the group here who's listening, your geographic service area, your patient acuity system. I mean, those are to me some of the top two items to focus on.
And they're going
You've
to
got a
take the
lo-
longest time.
they're going to take
So
the
you might as
longest
well get
time.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got, other policies, that ultimately have to be, reviewed and maybe just a couple little minor updates and tweaks for medical record content or plan of care content. So ultimately the goal that Sharon and I have is to be able to share sort of like a streamlined Cliff Notes version of what these changes or that we believe need to be reviewed and suggested. There are some things that clearly are new, and then there are others that just are important that we want to point out to you. So we're not going to just read you the
No.
proposed regulations verbatim and say, here you go, good luck, write a policy. We'll try and give you a broad overview of what sections are speaking to the policy review or policy creations. And then ultimately, again, some of the details to support what you need to do to maybe just plug and play.
And I
Um,
always say, look at your last survey. If you had deficiencies in the last survey, the surveyors could well come in and start looking at those policies and procedures first. What have you
Okay,
so
done in relationship to the new regs as of June
they
22nd?
will.
terrific.
Yeah.
You know, you just might have answered one of my final questions. I want to do these real. You know how we kind of end these things, like in lightning round type fashion. Is leadership's responsibility complete when the policy is published, or when the policy is consistently understood, implemented, and monitored?
A or B?
A
B.
or B?
I'll go with B.
I mean, I think Eric's done a great job. If everybody needs to be involved, we get it out there. You keep critiquing it. We haven't talked a lot about auditing, and I know you're going to talk a bit about that when we actually have the series. But it's like then you have to audit and make sure. Mark, you mentioned, do you observe this in the home? Absolutely. You need to get out there for your home
Mm.
observation visits and make sure it's working. And if it's not, what? Come back to the table, change it,
Yeah, yeah.
make it
Eric?
work for you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the answer to me is B if I have to choose A or B. I mean, it building it's the easiest part, putting on paper, but it's living it, it's breathing it,
Yeah,
it's reviewing it, and probing for deviations from perfection. I mean, perfection's a journey, it's not a destination. Ultimately, all the surveyors in the state understand that. But you have to have your policies in place to guide what ultimately
exactly.
is your operations. And so, there's a lot of information that's going to be contained, speaking to kind of the important pieces and some of the compliance and regulatory pieces within each of the given webinars. This one is trying to focus ultimately just on the Cliff Notes exclusive, items that need to be updated on paper. And that's just again the easy part. We'll talk through the implementation and the monitoring pieces, so that way you can have a well-defined compliance program and sound policies to satisfy what are ultimately our patients and clients. It's Let's not forget that this is all for humans and
Well,
the
and
care they deserve and need to receive for quality transitions at the end of life.
Yeah, and we're a bit over here, so I won't go into my final question, but what you just said is really my takeaway on this. I mean, policy and procedures are not simple documents; they're commitments.
Hmm.
Um,
It's a good way.
they describe how your organization intends to care for patients and support staff and respond to risk and all those different things that you have to be thinking about. Um, So, again, if today's discussion about your organization's policies and procedures piqued your interest, you're going to want to get in on the webinar on Wednesday. It's a live webinar where they'll go a lot deeper into policies and procedures under California's Hospice Emergency Regulations. And again, most importantly, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions during a live Q&A. If you want to register for that, and I suggest that you do, go to CAHSAH.org. That's CAHSAH.org. And then please join us next week. We'll examine another critical area of the regulations and what it means for hospice leadership across California. This special series is presented by the California Association for Health Services at Home. My name is Mark Wilson, and for Sharon and Eric and everybody at CAHSAH, thank you for joining us at the table. We'll see you at the webinar on Wednesday, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you both again.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.